I remember as a young student um, trying to sort out my direction in painting. What's of value? Who to model myself after. And I know a lot of people are very aware of their own age and want to model yourself after somebody you can see today, but I didn't take that view. I took this longer view, and I was trying to look at all the paintings of painters of all times as best I could. By the way, you can do it way better now with the internet. And had the good fortune of being in and out of the Frick and the Metropolitan and the Brooklyn museums in New York, as well as and then after that being in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and the Fogg, the Gardner museums, and really looking and looking and looking, trying to find that body of work that exemplified something that said to me, that is it, that is it. Uh, you could argue that I was in the position that you often hear that sort of a funny story about a guy going around saying that, you're just looking and looking and you keep saying, oh, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it. I was that guy. And so ultimately, though, what's sort of curious is I wound up with something a little bit like what Max Meldrum calls pure art. And that's I wound up living in a place that he would agree with me about. And so I don't know what that means to any of you, but the thing is, what his idea of pure art is rather significant. And then his idea of the decadent versus the rebirthing of this pure art, getting back to the pure art. That stuff is rather fascinating. However, the first part of the question from Richard O. I'm very much interested in what your opinion is of his Max Meldrum's statements on drawing in the book, specifically within the section entitled "The Analysis of Visual Phenomena by Speed of Mental Awareness and Definition," and the comments by Corot on mass drawing. Included as an example in the introduction of the book. I have attached photos of the sections that I hope are readable for you, and I think this is relevant as you were recently discussing contour drawing and mass drawing in your videos. Is he denouncing just a form of contour drawing or contour drawing in general? You got to keep remembering, by the way, that I'm not the Grand Max Meldrum interpreter. I just happen to be a guy who believes significantly in terms of training students that this is the way to do it, or that this is the approach to mastery of the visual impression that you gotta have under your belt, and what you should be aiming at as a student. And then where do you and the Boston School line up on this? Yeah. So the question, contour, he sort of throws it out. We've read those quotes before where he says, well, contour drawing outline. He never actually uses the word contour in the book. I don't think he does, Richard, but he uses the word outline. And he does similar to what I do. He talks about the outline of objects. And he talks about how people who do draw outlines often are drawing outlines you can't even see. There's not enough contrast to even see these lines. And you're laboring and laboring to draw something that's not even visually true. And then you keep it and you keep it in a way that produces a falseness in your picture. So he's trying to get us to see visually. And, things like the idea of lost and found, the way I present it, fit into that category. We're articulating the line, let's say the silhouette, with a line sometimes, and then immediately massing it. And again, if you look at the Boston School, particularly that drawing by Benson of the woman's head, which I'm not showing you now, you'd have some idea what I'm talking about. I hope this isn't tedious for most of you. This is particularly interesting, though, to Richard, and it's not bad to go back into it. It seems to me. So, he's denouncing outline drawing as a way of painting. He's telling you to paint what you see, the way you see, the way it comes to your eyes. That whole idea, the speed of mental awareness. That's what I call visual order, right? It comes to your eyes. This comes first, that second, that third. And when you're looking at an object, for example, there are parts of it that'll come to your eye before other parts, or some parts of it that may never come to your eye in any useful way. And so you wind up drawing, in that sense of making a shape, you wind up drawing with just those parts that are actually creating silhouettes. and we do it in the order of the power of the silhouette, okay? So in that way, we're pretty similar. As I said, he doesn't use the word contour drawing. So let's look at but then this question about mass drawing and Corot is a pretty interesting one. And I'm going to get my laser beam going here. Let's see if I can make this, there we go. So you can see here that, and I can just leave this up, but I'm just, the point that Corot makes is that he went to school and couldn't figure out how to draw because he said, I'd be going outside drawing from life, which apparently was what he was planning to do. And a lot of people had gone from that place of making imaginative pictures and sitting in their studios doing everything to going outdoors. Corot was one of those guys. How much he did indoors, he certainly did significant work indoors, but it's evident that he wanted to draw what he saw outdoors, effects or situations that weren't going to last very long, those sorts of things. He's got a wonderful ephemeral quality to his work, doesn't he? Sort of an evanescent, I love the spots. Well, he says, so let me get up close, just excuse me for doing this, but he said, I resolved for the future to go home without having done a complete work. So he said he was in there busy trying to draw somebody sitting there in a chair, and you know, the person would change their faces. Before you know it, the face would change. So he tried to draw the hands, the feet, and all that stuff, and put it all together. And so he said, instead of doing that, I set myself a different task. I started drawing in the mass. I set myself, and now drawing in the mass, and it doesn't say drawing in, it says drawing in the mass. And I set myself to take in a group at a glance, and if it stopped for a short time only, at least I had got its character, its general unconscious attitude. Now, that would be purely visual, wouldn't it? And if it remained, I could add more detail. And again, I've said to you before, that's what you see us doing in our way of working. We're actually doing a start that is essential, big, and then and it's a no-brainer to just then you take the time to add as much more as you want. So I've done this very often with a few strokes and succeeded in catching a general impression, and there's that word again, our impression, of a ballet and its surroundings at the opera just on a scrap of paper inside my hat. So let's just read, so you understand that should be pretty clear. He's talking about, and I'm going to show you pictures, so let's not even say any more about what he's talking about. But let's just follow up with this Max Meldrum. He says, when the artist starts to paint a tree, its existence as a tree, a physical abstraction, must be reduced from the world of physical objects, leaves, trunks, things like that, right? I'm saying that. To the two-dimensional world of vision, the ocular sensations of tone, form, color, okay? The ocular sensations. So that's Meldrum talking there. Now here you see the very definition of the picture on the left particularly. You see that grand gestural handling of the tree. A few lines here, a grand general deportment of the tree, so that big gesture is set up quickly, in the mentality of quickly. But you can see that he's doing essential and sort of grand gestural activities out in these areas here. And it doesn't have a ton of what, in fact, it has virtually no fine detail, just essential first wave stuff, the kind of stuff you might do as you go clippity-clopping fast through the visual impression. And again, you can see in his painting that he's painting by the spot, by what the word tache is I don't know how we pronounce that in French, but he's not drawing outlines of leaves as a lot of the Hudson River School people did, and others. He's not, or Lorraine even to some degree, to a lesser degree. But this mentality of trying to get the number of leaves out there, he's painting by the visual impression. So there's darker spots, there are blobs, middle tone blobs, and lighter blobs as you get out here, and they're different sizes and dispositions, and that's the impression mindset, and that's a mass-based mindset. So you can see that when you switch, Richard, what you're starting to get to is some sort of a combination of line and mass, but the orientation, the way, and by the way, everything that Max Meldrum says is about painting. I don't think I've ever seen anything that suggests drawing by him. So we're talking about handling, this whole thing about handling the massive values. And as I say it, what happens where they meet the other values, like spots like this right here. So it's a massive dark with significant drawing, and the other drawing is not significant till later. And you can even see implied that sort of thing in this area here, where this is all weaker to start with, and the evolution of it, the detail hasn't been added that could be, as it has here. Okay, so this picture winds up being very much in visual order. But it is telling you, though, that where you need to be drawing well is in places like this, you know, an edge here, a thing there, as opposed to drawing outlines of objects like he used to do when he was very young. But I think you understand that. I hope you do. I do think he did say that outline is very good for architectural drawing and names a bunch of other stuff, where as a form, the line itself has all sorts of good, diagrammatic uses to draw machine parts and architecture and a number of other things. Even with Gamel, we were even suggested that we walk up to the model and actually get, with a pencil and articulate on a pad, the exact shape of the eye, you know, where you could find anything that looked like a line. Now, that's Da Vinci and all that sort of stuff. But if you're trying to analyze, like Da Vinci did, the anatomy, like the layers of the skin or something, the line's a great thing, you know. And then you could point at it and say, between these lines is X or whatever. So it's good for the purposes like that, diagrammatic purposes. But it's non-visual. And you can see that in all the works of Da Vinci, for example, when he does anatomical breakouts, cutaways, things like that. All right. So now I'm going to jump away to his comment, and there I put your last name down, Richard. I guess I didn't use your first name. I meant to use Richard O. I would also appreciate, if you have the time, if you could address Meldrum's lectures at the back of the book, where he compares artists' work and talks philosophically about what he considers pure art versus decadent forms of art. Phrases he uses throughout the book as well. Would he consider Gamel's paintings a decorative form of art, since it's imaginative, for example? Now, we could just jump to that for a second, probably, and look at that work. I'm uncomfortable in this chair because I've been sitting here. I messed up a video by forgetting to turn on the part of it, so I'm now doing this twice, and I'm probably going to be jumping around to this chair. It's not a great chair to start with. So overlook that if you can. So let's see. I'm sure Richard said he gives us these pages, and this is that breakout about Burne-Jones. And I'm mostly going to leave that with you. What he says is that he just compares Burne-Jones's work with Giorgione's. And you can see that Burne-Jones is false looking, right? Now, I've said that before. So what you'll see is that, and he makes this suggestion, this wheel is implausible. And these people's relationship to it are totally implausible. But even so is the placement of this person. It's possible, but the fact is the values don't suggest anything spatial. So this picture is significantly false. He's got his reasons for doing it, whatever those are. But significantly false, visually false. So the science of appearances, right? And so what he's saying is that Giorgione, on the other hand, is more connected to the world of seeing things as they are. And so Meldrum's idea is that pure art is the first art, which is when you started drawing something the first time you ever did it, you just wanted to make it look like that. And you used whatever visual content you could come up with to make it look like that, darks and lights or whatever you could come up with, even sense of form or whatever, and or linear relationships or whatever it is. And then gradually over time, the science of appearances, as he calls it, starts developing. Now you can see, though, the picture on the right has a sense that this guy's very aware of the spatial relationships produced by value masses. And his forms, his figures, his drapery all have this sense of the plausible visually. That is to say, I wouldn't say that the figures on the left side don't have that. I'm saying that but in the context, they're isolated, so they really don't work in the context. These guys feel like they're of a piece visually, so with a visual impression, even though it's an early form of it, and he makes that point. This is Giorgione attempting this early on. Interesting to wonder what he might have done if he'd lived longer. Now, one of your points is Waterhouse okay? Actually, let me jump this one. I'll come back. I want to look at the Gamel. So you said, is Gamel's work then going to be considered decadent? So the idea of decadent is, remember the word decay. you have this pure form that is there's a birth of truth. You're trying to draw something, and then somebody sees you doing it. Say the first time you ever did it, somebody said, "Wow, man!" And they look over there and it looks like that, or it looks like them, whatever you're painting. And that thing about the pursuit of truth in front of you, uh, that is the truth of the appearances, truth to your eyes, is what he's talking about. And he says, and my sense of even the Renaissance itself is that people had, throughout those years between the Greeks and 1500s, 1400s, people had been working with just whatever somebody had taught them. But sometime around Giotto, people start looking again, and then by the time you get to Michelangelo, they're looking at great sculpture, the Greeks in particular, and some of the Romans, where they can see the truth. The guys that they really respect are those guys who really power up the truth in the course of making their art, right? So the truth is this huge thing, that visually appearance-based truth, the look of things. Instead of using pure art, we used to just talk about a painting that has the look of nature. It has the look of nature. It looks plausible. You can see on this picture on the right, it doesn't look plausible at all by Burne-Jones, but the Gamel one does. The Gamel one is made up of pieces, just like the Giorgione. Neither one of them was set up on the spot. Gamel didn't set these people up on a staircase and then go paint for 2 days there. But he's put all his time into making it look visually, by the science of appearances, shall we say, visually plausible. So no, I don't think he would call that decadent. This is decadent. This decadent means decay. It means a falling away from that first purity of motive, which was to make a likeness or to build your art on the assumption that truth was going to be that important, the truth of nature in front of you, and the truth in the sense of how things appear to the human eye. So and this feeds off of when we did a couple of videos ago too. And he talks again about Velázquez and Rembrandt, and he says, "Don't you see, these guys aren't painting. This isn't a crucifixion in any classic sense of the word. This is a man standing there, and Velázquez is hitting value. He's copying values and getting edges and turning form as it appears in the science of appearances, as things appear." And so he says he's dispassionate. He's despite this being a sort of a passion-based, but he's isolating. Everything he's doing is about the management of the appearances, of value data and all that sort of stuff, till it looks like in the great visual order sense. And his other point, of course, is that he talks about Rembrandt. And he says that Rembrandt wouldn't have been anything probably if he'd died before he was 50. I don't know that he said 50, but somewhere in there. But the last bunch of years of his life, he is the painter that started suddenly incorporating truth, visually, truth. And you see it on the left there. There's no more powerful portrait than that one down there in that very sense. And so, so this is truth of the visual impression. This is truth of the way things appear in nature. And you'd see his earlier work is very mannered, his early portraits, and I'm not going to show that. So this is what he calls pure art, and this is what he calls decadent art that's fallen away gradually, more and more fallen away from adherence to the look of nature, and it begins to be a device, a sort of a fantasy-based thing. I'm going to share a quote with you, which I wasn't sure I was going to use. I was thinking I wouldn't, but it might be useful. He talks about Meldrum. Now I'm going to Meldrum's conversation here. But he talks about children and how they think about this stuff. Oh, let me find it. All right, somewhere in here. Here we go. Hybrid forms of art, and that's what this would be. Hybrid forms of art can be accepted and made allowance for within the particular periods in the development of science of depiction. They can be accepted as a hieroglyph, a pictogram, a painting in the 14th century, a painting of the 14th century, or a child's drawing, but they're not pure art forms and can't be considered as such in the present state of the craft of drawing. In other words, they've fallen away. They're now into this thing where people are just putting in their own 2 cents worth, as it were, and that's that impurity that he's actually talking about. I haven't found the primary. Oh, there it is. The ability to appreciate and understand pure forms of art is the characteristic of the adult mind, the mark of a high state of mental development. Savages and children deck out facts in fantastic dresses, where civilized adults just as instinctively take them off to discover the greater beauties which they conceal. But you're talking about this idea of fantastic dresses. Well, there it is right there. And in both cases here, right? So the Lempicka is a I think she's I think she paints in this country. I'm not sure if she's an American actually. But you can see the mannerism of the Deco mannerism. And this is the Rococo mannerisms. Mannerisms, in other words, they're deviations. They're falling away from, and so he calls decay, decadence, falling apart. The power of truth is falling apart. The visual is starting to fall apart for some other cause. You have another cause. It's sort of the world we're in now. Gamble would ask you, you'd use that word art in a very derogatory way from time to time. And that idea of making, making the world in your own image and doing your own thing and all of a sudden winding up in all these mannerisms is very much in the category of what he perceived, very likely, certainly with us as students, would have been talking about. So I'm giving you another Gamble, by the way, where he's doing an imaginative work like the other guys. But this is just showing you again where you can see that he's creating like plausible perspective here, for example. And everything about these things has, to the extent it can, it has that sense of the sky, the whatever, all that's plausible. And then he's got all these other things. And I don't know that, these openings in the sky and all that sort of stuff. I don't know to what extent. Here's mannerism in the one sense. It's symbolism. And Gamble would very much like to use his symbols. These are rotten with symbols. So if Meldrum wants to use that as a criteria and reduce this away from pure art, that might be the case. He certainly wants to get you to stop thinking about subject matter as one of those crucial things. So I think that's the story there with that. Let me run back. Oh yeah, so I said I'd talk about Waterhouse. So he said, is there anything wrong with Waterhouse? What's wrong with Waterhouse? I like Waterhouse. So I do too. It's Ophelia, and this is the Lady of Shalott. And I believe even Meldrum probably would say about these, even though these guys, they were with the pre-Raphaelites, this guy has nothing in common with the way Burne-Jones is working. There's nothing false about these. That's to say, they look like many of the other naturalists of the times. I'm thinking of Bastien Lepage and people like that, where they look like they're painting straight and true, trying to get the value relationships right and all that sort of stuff, as if they would have been that way in person. So in that sense, I think probably the answer to your question per Waterhouse is that he wouldn't have. But, I don't want to be putting words in his mouth, but basically I just wanted to define, this idea of pure art for Meldrum, what he's saying, everything I can read. And you can just punch in, if you find the online version somewhere or this through somebody, punch in the word pure, and then you'll find a handful, maybe 12, 15 quotes, where he uses the word pure, and you can very quickly realize that all he's saying is these people paint straight and true like a Christian when they make their shapes and things like that. They're not being manneristic and using nature just as a takeoff point. And that's what he's basically saying when they start doing the other thing. That's a decay, and you'll see yourself. He makes this point that throughout history there's this ebb and flow. There's this giving in to all this for some periods of time, like the Rococo era, and then there's this waking up again. And I don't know to what extent where Chardin lands in relation to it, but you can see Chardin beginning to be again that pure artist. He's going back and taking nature and powering up the truth in front of him visually, and getting more, making authoritative relationships, for example, of value relationships and all those sorts of things. And shall we leave it at that? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I may have left that in a half thought, but I started having other thoughts, and I better not go to all these other thoughts. Let's just look back one more time and make sure I've not left, as I like to do, anything out of his questioning. Yeah. But you can follow through in looking at his own writing, especially since you appear to have the book there. It's really nice that you have that book, Richard. But you can go back there and find what I'm saying is so. That there's an expectation. Oh, I remember where I was, and I got to finish off. And that is that this whole idea of Renaissance, rebirth, birthing and coming back to this original place. He thinks of it as the primeval. The primeval is truth to nature, truth to the look of nature. And in a sense, you wonder where he got that. Was that really ever the case? Because people seem to have. But on the other hand, when you talk about the Greeks, what were they doing? They valued the work most highly that also contained the most truth. So even though they used the typical forms and that sort of thing, they valued that power of the truth, or the atypical, I guess you'd say. So, but the idea is, though, that throughout history there's going to be this mannerist thing that goes on and sort of deforms everything, and then there's going to be this return back to the search for the true and that thing. And I'm just saying to you, like I said to myself when I was young, I'm saying to you as if you're students, look for that work that you find the most powerfully right, whatever that means. But don't listen to anybody. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to anybody else. Just look at that body of work throughout history. And I just simply found myself on what he would have called the birthing portion every time, the Renaissance portion. And I never could get myself to like the decadent stuff. I could never get myself to like mannerisms. They all have within them their own death pangs, somebody would say. So, and they don't last. Nobody starts repeating that kind of stuff. Nobody does. Everybody, when they go back to regenerating, like we're that age now, we're in this age of regenerating our form. Everybody wants to go back and paint truth again. And I'm just saying to you, all you realists that are out doing outlines and stuff, consider that there is a higher visual truth that you might want to also address, that you must actually ultimately address, which is what Meldrum talks about and what I talk about. All right, that's enough. Yeah, okay. I hope I've answered enough of your questions there, Richard. I really don't want to do that again. I don't want to be the voice for Meldrum. I'm just trying to interpret this because it's useful for all of us to get back to talking about the nature of this form we have. And all these thoughts are very, very useful, very good. All right. So next time we'll see you on the 5th of October live for everybody who can be there. And I think we're trying to do the afternoon of that Sunday. And first Sunday, whatever it is of October, I think it's the 5th. And in the meantime, I want to thank you for subscribing and sharing and liking and commenting and all the rest. Very much appreciated. Donations, very appreciated. And I want to say that the last, my producers of the last 50 videos have actually been paid for by you guys. You've covered them. And I think we're just breaking even, but that's cool. That's part 2, right? The first part is don't break even. The second part is find yourself breaking even and try to catch up from the back. Okay. In any case, thank you all. It's been fun. And we'll see you in the next one.